All right, my name is Irene Wegner, and I am here as an interviewer for the Veterans Oral History Collection Program for the Fairhope Public Library. I have the pleasure of introducing, I guess I'll just go by Nick.
That's fine.
Okay. I don't see anything in your name that gets me a Nick, but Nick Shoultz.
My first name is Enoch.
Oh, okay. That's a family name?
Yeah, I was named after my dad, and he wasn't there to say don't do that. So when I was born. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh my. Where was he then? He
was on his way to Iwo Jima.
I kind of figured that was all right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, wow. So he was in Iwo Jima,
right.
World War II. Did he ever talk about that?
I don't know. I was born January 30th. He was killed in action March 1st.
Oh, I'm sorry.
He was a platoon sergeant.
All right. So you never did know him? No.
Never did.
Okay.
Only by reputation.
Okay. All right. And you, where were you when you decided, or were you drafted, or how did you get into the service?
Actually, I had a draft deferment because I'm sole surviving son. If you ever saw the movie Saving Private Ryan, that was the whole basis for that whole thing. No, he was a Marine. He was decorated.
Yeah, I would think so.
So I kind of want to follow in his footsteps.
And did you have any stories about him that you would want to share?
Well, my grandmother told me wouldn't talk about him too much because she, as I understand it, she had a nervous breakdown after she found out he was killed in action. And my mother she didn't talk about him. My mother was a little strange, you might say, in that respect. She did not keep any of the letters that he sent to her. In fact, looking back on it, I really don't think they knew each other very well because my mother, Mary Alice Young was her maiden name. She was a bride, a mother, and a widow in less than a year before her 21st birthday.
Oh my.
So they met out in California. He was at Camp Pendleton when they formed up. He was in the 5th Marine Division, and he was there. They formed it up, and she was working for North American Rockwell, and I think they were married in Oceanside, California. And he was gone a lot because they were down there training the division, and I just don't think they knew each other very well. It's kind of a wartime romance kind of thing.
Yeah,
so.
yeah.
But she didn't talk about him. My grandmother wouldn't talk about him very much. I got some information from my cousins, and my dad was born in Selma, and he was raised in sunny South Alabama, which is just down the road from Pine Hill. He was a graduate of Pine Hill High School, graduated and immediately went in the Marine Corps, and that was before the war started in 1941. And he was what they call, I don't think they have it anymore, but back then they called it a Sea School Marine. Marines were trained to operate on capital ships, carriers, and aircraft and battleships, and they were the guys that fired the guns, the anti-aircraft, that sort of thing. And he was sent to Bremerton, Washington, and he was stationed aboard the USS West Virginia, which was a battleship that was heavily damaged at Pearl Harbor, and they towed it back to Bremerton to be rebuilt. And he was there, and I'm not sure how long, a couple of years, I think. And then in 1944, the Marine Corps formed up the 5th Division at Camp Pendleton, and they trained down there for what turned out to be Iwo Jima, which was one of the last battles in the war.
Right.
And there was,
a horrible battle.
Yeah, if you read much about the battle for Iwo Jima, it was a lot of real young guys.
Right.
My dad he turned 22 in January, And they went ashore. February 19th was D-Day for Iwo Jima in 1945. So he was relatively young, but he was a platoon sergeant, which is the equivalent to a staff sergeant or E6 today. So he was kind of one of the old guys, really, in that battle. I went to Montevallo, University of Montevallo, graduated in 67, and then my mother had remarried and had 3 more children, which are a half brother and 2 half sisters, and she was living in California when her second husband died in 1968. I'm sorry, 67, 66. It's my senior year in college.
Senior year.
So I thought, I'll go out there and help her out financially. She was living with her sister and brother-in-law in Carmel, California, which is just down the road from Monterey. It's a pretty place.
Yeah.
But if you've got a college degree in business and your Aunt Millie doesn't own a grocery store or something in Carmel, there's just no job openings for someone like that. So I had applied for, while I was in college, took the exams for government service and got a call.
What do you major in?
I was a business major in economics and history minor.
Okay, then that was great. Yeah.
And I got a call from Los Angeles. They had an opening down there for what they thought I was qualified for, which was a special agent in what they called back then the intelligence division. Well, when I interviewed for the job, I'd read all the James Bond novels, so I knew exactly what I was getting into. And what I didn't really understand was it's enforcing the tax laws.
So you weren't James Bond?
No, I didn't do any of that kind of stuff. I got through they had 3 different schools you had to go to, and I went through those, and was just, I'd always wanted to go in the Marine Corps, just to see if I could measure up. And when I was in one of those schools back in Washington, I'm sitting there getting bored out on my tree, getting lectured to about tax law, which is, I can't think of anything much more boring than that. But I remember they called a break, and I walked out and got on the telephone out in the hall and called the local Marine recruiter and said, "Can I come see you?" And so I went down there and took the mental test, and I wanted to go to flight school. So when I finally went on active duty in September of '68, I went to Officer Candidate School in Quantico, and then when you finish that, then go to infantry training, what the Marines call the basic school, and that was 6 months long. And
how was that?
It was interesting. It was from December to June of '69, and while I was there, they, if you wanted to apply for additional schooling afterwards, and I had always kind of wanted to be a helicopter pilot. I had a friend in college that was a Marine helicopter pilot, Vietnam veteran, and so I applied for flight school. At that time, this was in '68, I guess, '69. The Navy, who normally trains pilots for the Marine Corps at Pensacola, apparently weren't turning out pilots fast enough to suit the Marines, so they had an agreement with both the Army and the Air Force to train Marines in their flight school. So I applied. I got to go to Army flight school, which was strictly helicopters, no fixed wing training at all like you would normally get. And so I went to, I think it was 4 months and 4.5 months in Mineral Wells, Texas, out east of Dallas, or west of Dallas. And then to the Marines, for some reason, they all went to Savannah for the second half of flight school. Most Army guys went to Savannah. I'm sorry, Fort Rucker. And so I went to Savannah for the last 4, and then I was stationed out in California after flight school for transition into H-53 helicopters. The great big ones, Super Jolly Green, they call them, the Air Force.
Those are bigger than the Hueys, or?
Oh yeah, they're a
Okay.
lot bigger than the Huey. We could carry 40 plus troops.
Oh,
You know, you
okay.
could drive 2 Jeeps in the back of it, take off.
So
Great thing.
you were then on a ship, and you'd take people from there to the?
No, what happened was I transitioned into the H-53 in California at Santa Ana, HMHT 301. And when I finished that training, the normal course of events, I would be getting orders to Vietnam in, this would have been 69, would have been November, December 1969. And I had a buddy that was going through the 53 transition with me who had a pregnant wife. I was single at the time.
Yeah, but how did your mom and stepsisters, how they feel about this?
Well, I couldn't, you know, I wasn't going to be able to help them out, you know, financially by getting a job in Los Angeles, and I wasn't making that much money down there anyway. And, you know, my mother, she was, bless her heart, she was, you know, I'm not going to live my life through you. You live your own life. And so I don't know whether she objected to it or not. She never really said. I'm sure it gave her some heartburn, but.
But you were there with your buddy.
Yeah, I was down in Santa Ana, down south in Orange County. And anyway, he had a pregnant wife that was due. He was due to go overseas in September. And that's when his baby was due, his first child. So we worked it out through the hierarchy of the Marines where I swapped with him, because I was, you know, I would want to go ahead and get it over with, you might say. So I wound up getting orders to Vietnam, and I left the States in, I think it was around the first part of September of 1969.
69, yeah.
So, yeah. And I had been Army trained. I was trained on the Huey in the Army, and I had the 53 transition in the Marine Corps in Santa Ana from, I think I reported there in March of 69, and then I finished my training in August, September of 69, got my orders to Vietnam, and was on a military charter plane with 200 and some other, you know, servicemen going over. I don't know for sure if they were all Marines or not, but they landed in Okinawa for refueling. And I remember a guy coming on board as a Marine. He called out 5 names, and mine was one of them. And he said, "You guys are staying here. We don't need you."
Oh.
So I wound up getting my orders changed to Okinawa, and I checked in there, and before I checked in, the way the officers took their meals at the officers club, and so I went down there for lunch at Fatima Air Base, was the Marine Corps Air Station Fatima on Okinawa, and went into the officers club, and I sat down and knew some guys that I'd met, you know, in flight school, both Army and Marine Corps. And what's the deal on Okinawa? And they said, well, if you want to get flight time, which I did, you know, at that time everybody who had wings was wanting to get out of the Marine Corps and go and fly for the airlines. You know, so the more time you had, the better off you were. And so I talked to some guys that I knew, and they said, well, if you want to get flight time, you want to get in fly Hueys, because they fly the VIPs all over the island.
Oh.
And the 46, they had, at that time, the helicopters in the Marine Corps were Hueys, H-46s, which were like a small H-47 tandem rotor, and the H-53s, and they had a squadron for each of them at Fatima. So I went to the group after lunch, and the group personnel guy was a pretty nice fella, and I convinced him that I had just as much time in the Huey as I did in the H-53. And if they had an opening in the Huey squadron, I sure would like to have it. And it turned out I got the last one that fiscal year in the Huey squadron. So I got in there, and then was for a time a personal pilot to the 3rd Marine Division commanding general, was a Major General 2-star, Louis Metzger was his name, and he was a prince of a guy. And funny story about him, he liked to fly, but he was not a rated aviator. And what he would do was pull rank on the co-pilot whenever he went anyplace in a military aircraft, pull rank on the co-pilot and make the pilot teach him how to fly whatever they were flying. And it turned out he's a pretty good Huey pilot. And the squadron, I was in VMO 6 was the name of the squadron. It was composite squadron, had Hueys and OV-10 observation planes at the time. So I was in there with fixed wing guys, and the executive officer called me in when they decided they were going to make me the personal pilot for this guy when he got the command of the 3rd Marine Division on Okinawa, and said, "This is the deal. He likes to fly, and so we're going to send you over there." Normally, a Huey was flown by 2 pilots, and he said, "I'm not going to waste time with sending a co-pilot over there and have him sit in the back because we know what Metzger's going to do. He's going to pull rank." So they gave me a helmet and gloves and sent me over there with him, and he turned out to be just a really, really prince of a guy. I admired him greatly. First time I flew over there and picked him up, he's in the left seat of the Huey, which is the co-pilot seat, and I had a helmet for him and flight gloves, and he shows up in duty uniform, and I introduced myself on the intercom because the rotors were turned. It's noisy, and I said, "I'm Lieutenant Shoultz, and it looks like I'm going to be your personal pilot for a while." And he looks at me and he said, "Lieutenant, I like to fly. I want to get as much flight time as I can, but you're in charge." And I thought, here I am, a
lieutenant,
barely trying to hide the ears, lieutenant, and he meant it. If you said, "I got the controls," his hands immediately went up. So he was a real pleasure to fly with, and of course I let him.
Where did you take him to then?
Wherever he wanted to go on Okinawa. There was Marine bases all over, and he was the commanding general. So, he was wanting to go to different bases and for meetings and meet with his subordinates and that sort of thing. So I flew him a lot.
So while he's having his meetings, what do you as a pilot do?
Usually just wait by the aircraft for him to come back. Depends on how long he's going to be there. He was very courteous to us. If it was around lunchtime or something like that, he'd send a Jeep back, pick us up, take us to the mess hall. He was very, very thoughtful individual. So, and he was a lot of fun. You could joke with him and have a good time. I really enjoyed that part of the tour. And at that time, when I got to Okinawa, they had a program where if you spent 4 months on Okinawa, there was a 2-month window between your 4th month and 6th month when you could apply for transfer to Vietnam. And then after you'd been on Okinawa 6 months, they didn't want to fool with you. They'd leave you there, and you couldn't. That window closed. Mm-hmm. So when I got close, 2 weeks before I was eligible to that window, they canceled that because this is 1971, mm-hmm. and they're starting to draw down from mm-hmm. Vietnam. So that was, I assume, one of the reasons why they didn't need the 5 of us over there that day. Because I had a roommate. He flew a different kind of aircraft. He flew an H-46. Larry Thompson came around 3 weeks behind me, and he went straight to Vietnam because they needed 46 pilots that day, but not 53. That's the way the Marine Corps worked. It was kind of strange like that. So they also had a program where Marine Corps had what they called a floating reserve or battalion landing team. It was 4 Navy ships, and it was a 3-month cruise. You'd leave Okinawa, go out for 3 months as part of that, detached to that battalion. And they had 2 Hueys from my squadron, and 4 pilots, I think we had 14 enlisted guys that were the mechanics that worked on it. And so I volunteered for that and got accepted and was out, and they went into the war zone, quote unquote, or combat zone, the end of December of 70 and the January of 71. So my official papers say I was in Vietnam from December 70 to January 71, a whole 2 weeks or whatever it was. But officially a Vietnam vet, but I never even laid eyes on the land, no boots on the ground, as they say. And went back to Okinawa, and Headquarters Marine Corps didn't get my MOS changed to Huey pilot in time, so I got orders to go to the 1st Marine Brigade in Hawaii as an H-53 pilot. So I'm back into 53s.
Did you mind that? Or
no. Well,
when they fly to Hawaii.
Right. When they first, they came down, somebody, we were checking on your orders, and before the actual papers got there, somebody said, "You're going to the 1st Marine Brigade." And I didn't know, I'd never heard of the 1st Marine Brigade, and I misunderstood and thought barracks, Marine barracks, and all I knew about was the spit and polish guys in Washington, D.C. that marched around, and and I thought, oh God, what do they need with a helicopter pilot? So it turned out it was the 1st Marine Brigade in Hawaii, and I was in HMH 463, which had been in Vietnam. The squadron colors of the unit had been in Vietnam, and they had come transferred out of Vietnam and part of the drawdown to Hawaii, and I got there in, I think it was August of 70, would have been 71. Yeah, August of 71. And it'd been out of country. Most of the guys there were finishing up their year-long tour. They'd come out of country with the squadron. And so they all rotated back, and then they started bringing in fresh blood from around the country.
But you didn't, you weren't impacted by any of the protests then, because you were going from one Marine place to another, correct?
Mm-hmm.
All right, okay.
No, I didn't. Basically I spent 5.5 years in the Marines. I spent almost 3 years of it overseas, outside the continental United States, between Okinawa and Hawaii. And then towards the end, typical Marine Corps again, they shipped in a whole bunch of brand new, right out of flight school, first lieutenants when they brought the squadron back. And then 2 years later, these first lieutenants all get promoted to captain, and then somebody looks at the table of organization equipment and says, we got way too many captains in this squadron. We got to, shift them around a little bit. So they came down and says, anybody wants to go to transfer to Pensacola as a flight instructor, raise your hand. So I said, okay, I'll go. And I had at that time like 1.5 years to go before my tour was up. And thought, well, that'd be a great time, again, build flight time, go to work for the airlines. And so when they came around to cutting the orders, they said, oh, we were just kidding, you're going to Cherry Point.
I know it well.
Yeah, well, I didn't particularly want to. Anyway, they sent me to Cherry Point, and the helicopters, Cherry Point is a fixed wing base. It's a huge base. It's the headquarters for I think it's the 1st Marine Air Wing. I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and look at my orders to see what it was. But anyway, the way the Marines work, you got your orders to the wing. You check into the wing headquarters, and they farm you out to the different squadrons. Well, again, before I checked in, I found out that the guy that was, his name was Colonel Reichert. He was the executive officer of VMO 6 on Okinawa, and so he knew me, personally, and he was now the squadron commander of the Huey squadron at New River, which is about 50 miles from Cherry Point. Right. And they were flying the new, at that time, new twin-engine Hueys, the N model. And so I was kind of eager to fly those. So I called him up before I checked in and said, reintroduced myself and said, would you have an opening for me in your squadron? He says, yeah, I need, he says, I'm getting guys right out of flight school that really don't know how to fly, and I need a second tour aviator to help teach them out. And I said, would you mind conveying that thought to the wing personnel? He says, I'll do it right now. So I'm thinking, boy, I got it wired now. Go check into wing personnel, and some major, I don't remember his name, but tried to work it into the conversation. Did you hear from Colonel Reichert down at whatever the squadron was? He said, yeah, but I don't take orders from him. I thought, uh-oh. So he sent me out. First he sent me for a week over to there was what they called a casual company, which is where they put all the guys that were just to process the paperwork to get them out of the Marine Corps that were due for discharge. It was, just paper shuffling job. So I went over there, and
that's not flying.
That's not flying. And they didn't have any. The only helicopters they had at Cherry Point were search and rescue guys, and I didn't have any search and rescue training at that point. But anyway, I went over and checked in and got a hold of by that time I was a captain, and talked to the guy that was in charge that was getting out of the Marine Corps. And his first remark was when I walked in, says, I guess I'm your replacement. He said, who'd you piss off? Because he said, this has got to be the worst job at Cherry Point. So he was a nice guy. I don't remember his name, but he said, I had gotten married by that time. And he said, go take care of your household goods and get set up in quarters and stuff like that, and come back and see me on Friday, which was 2 or 3 days later. So a couple days later, I get word from somebody, and I don't remember who, that says this major personnel guy wanted to see me again. Okay, maybe there's a ray of hope out there. So I go over and talk, to see him, and proceed to get chewed out. He says, where have you been the last 2 or 3 days? I said, well, you sent me over here, and this guy said go do whatever. He says, no, you're going out to it was headquarters and maintenance group. It was a Nike missile battery squadron that they had there at Cherry Point, and again, a captain with some flight time, and I thought valuable experience that I could help the Marine Corps out for the cause. And they had, I took over the adjutant's job, the group adjutant, and he was a buck sergeant. And he honestly
And what does that person do?
The adjutant, you're basically the gopher for the colonel that runs the group. Whatever he tells you, you do it. You make out the duty schedules, and it's a desk job. And he probably that sergeant probably did a better job than I did, because it was, because I had an attitude by that time. And was finally, my discharge was up in the end of February of '74. So I was discharged, went, at that time my future ex-wife's mother had cancer. She was basically in hospice. So we went back to Columbus, Ohio, and I went up there. And when I went through, back up a little bit, when I was going through Army Flight School, they had 3 sections. The Army was turning out a couple or 300 pilots every 2 weeks.
Wow.
I mean, they really had a thing going. And it was, looking back on it, was probably the best government school of any type, military or civilian, that I ever went to. Whoever set that up did a beautiful job. Because when you got out of there, you knew what you were doing. But half the class that they had 3 sections. There was like 10 or 12 Marines going through that particular flight school, that 2-week branch, and they divided it up into 3 sections. And I was the only Marine in my section. I was in the smallest section. So I was kind of their mascot, you know, and nobody messed with my Marine. And it was, I mean, we had a great rapport with those guys. It was a lot of fun. And the other half the class was commissioned Army officers, anywhere from second lieutenant up through captain. Were going through the flight school. And in that section, and then the other half were warrant officer candidates who were, and that was their kind of their boot camp, you might say, because they were going through to learn to fly. So they got commissioned as a W1 when they graduated, and we got wings in whatever rank we were. And I went from second to first lieutenant in flight school. At that time, it was, I think, 13 months. If you didn't kill anybody or screw up real bad, you got promoted. There was no merit to it. It was just time that you got in. But so I knew what a warrant officer did in the Army. A warrant officer, helicopter pilot in the Army, is expected to know how to fly, and basically that's it. You're not supposed to be in any kind of a command billet where you are in charge of anybody. So show up, you fly your mission, stay current on the aircraft, and go home. So when I got to Columbus, Ohio, after I was discharged, was basically unemployed looking for a job, and to stay in the Marine Reserves, the closest Marine Reserve outfit was in Alpena, Michigan, which was about a 6-7 hour drive up the interstate one way from Columbus. 20 minutes up the interstate was a National Guard facility that had Hueys, and the smaller aircraft, the 58s, it was an air calf troop is what it was. So I went up there and said, look, I'm Army trained, know the system, and they picked me up, and so I joined the National Guard as a warrant officer, W2, down from captain. So I went in as a warrant officer. And
was that usual that you'd go down like that? I mean,
excuse
why
me,
did they do that?
If you want to be a warrant officer. I mean, I didn't even ask if they had an opening for a captain. They came to me about a year later and said, if you want your commission back, we got an opening. And I said, no, I'm happy where I am. I'll just stay here.
Why?
Well, in the National Guard is state militia. The governor owns you rather than the president, unless they activate the Guard, as opposed to, say, the Army Reserve, where you're federalized. Right. So it was a state organization, and the way the promotion system worked, when you became eligible for promotion, and if you got promoted, say from captain to major, you had to go out and find an opening for a major.
Oh.
It was up to you to basically, or they'd help you out, of course, but you had to go basically find one, and it may or may not be a flying job. It could be,
a desk job.
A desk job, or it could be, in a infantry unit or a tank unit or whatever, depending on how the Guard was set up. But as a warrant officer, when you put in your time, you got promoted to W3, and you stayed there to wherever you were. So I didn't want any part of that. And then I got to thinking about it, and the IRS wasn't that bad a job, and I had the training, and I knew what I was doing, So I got back on with the IRS in Columbus, and then transferred and wanted to come back to Mobile is where I wanted to go, because my passionate hobby was sailing, and so there wasn't too many places around Columbus, Ohio where you could do that, but boy, there's sure is a bunch around here. So I transferred. They had a blizzard come through Ohio. It was the end of January, and it must have been 77, 76, early 77. There was a blizzard.
Yes, there was.
Up there. And I remember I got called out. The Guard called me out about 11:31 night. There was a little town south of Columbus called Washington Courthouse that was completely snowed in. And they were having people, it was a farming community, and they had some old folks there that were they couldn't get, the roads, they couldn't even get snowplows down the roads. It was, the blizzard was that bad. And so they called out the guard, and I got called out about 11 o'clock at night. Went up to the flight facility, and they sent us down to Washington Courthouse, and we got there about 1:30 in the morning. They had a
center for
set up in the high school, and we got there, and I remember we got a sheriff's deputy came up and says, "Look, we got a call from this farmhouse. The lady that lives there has 3 small kids. Her husband is a cross-country trucker, and he's stranded out west somewhere. And the lady's mother couldn't get a hold of her, and could we go out and check on them because she had 3 kids?" So the sheriff's deputy, we're literally hovering down, taking roads. He'd go to the left at the next intersection and going down to. We landed in a field next to the house and shut down and went in, and this lady had run out of heating oil.
Oh, wow.
And she was literally burning furniture in a pot-bellied stove in her kitchen. She had the kitchen closed off. And that's where she was with her
kids.
3 kids and a little puppy, about a 2-month-old puppy. So we loaded them all up in the helicopter, and the kids are all excited. They're going to go for a ride.
Never forget that.
Never forget that. And so we went out there, and they got, they had blankets and sleeping bags and stuff because they knew they were going to this shelter. And we got out there, got them all loaded up, took off. We're heading back to the high school, and the crew chief, bless his heart, was very fastidious type. So he's back there kind of organizing the back of the aircraft, and he picks up a sleeping bag, and he's going to fold it up, but there's something heavy in it. And he reaches down, and here's this 6-month-old baby in the bottom of the sleeping bag. The mother had put the child in there to keep it warm and put the sleeping bag in the helicopter. And in the excitement of, she got 2 other kids and a puppy to take care of too, forgot about it. And the kid was turning blue.
Oh my gosh.
If the crew chief hadn't been the fastidious type, the child would have probably suffocated by the time we got to the facility back there. But anyway, the reason I brought that up was the next weekend I got in my car and I drove to Birmingham to interview for a transfer. It was, I think it was I-75 from Columbus to Cincinnati. It was a 1-lane road even a week later because of the snow. I mean, it's like driving down a tunnel.
Oh yeah, I know.
And anyway, it worked out a transfer to. They didn't have an opening in Mobile, but they did in Montgomery. So I transferred to Montgomery for a couple of months and transferred the National Guard down here. And so got in Guard here, and then eventually down to Mobile. A couple of years later, I transferred to Mobile. And the rest is history, I guess. So, retired from the Guard. The IRS was a federal law enforcement job, and I was eligible to retire at age 50 if I had 20 years service. So I turned in my retirement papers to retire I think it was the 1st or 2nd of September. And then at that time, the National Guard came out, this is in 1995, and they said, we're going to deactivate your unit. So anybody that's got 20 years or more, you'd be eligible to retire, which is we'll give you a retirement bonus, a buyout, so to speak,
right.
if we don't have to fool with you to get to another unit. And so I said, call on me. And it turned out in the National Guard as a pilot, I sat down and figured out one year, I spent 24 weekends with the Guard, and 26 is half. So basically it was 4 days off a month with the regular job in the National Guard. So I went from, it turned out that they deactivated the unit the first weekend in September. So I went, on Friday I left my civilian job, and on Sunday my National Guard went away. So from, going 20 years or 20 plus years with 4 days off a month to now I got, what do I do? So I had a lot of time. And
do you go sailing?
Yes. What I did was one of my, I guess, dreams, you might say, was to retire and go sailing. So my wife and I, she had never, when we met, she had never been on a sailboat and got seasick. And but we had decided we'd been married at that time. We got married in '81, so in '95 we're 14 years in. And in 1991, we adopted two brothers. They were orphans. Their birth parents were Vietnamese, and they were like 26 months apart. And they were 4 and 6 years old. We adopted them, and so we had bought a 43-foot sailboat.
Wow. Okay.
And had it at the Mobile Yacht Club. And so I went to work on the boat Monday morning after I retired and worked on it until the next spring, and then we left with the boys, and my wife Jane did the homeschooling, and we spent 2 years circumnavigating the Caribbean.
How wonderful.
Living on the boat. Yeah,
Wow.
it was a good time.
Wow, that's wonderful. Well, thank you. Wow, Nick, you have had a very interesting and exciting life. Thank you for sharing that.
I had a guy that worked for me in Okinawa.
He was there too, yeah.
I always tried to pilots always had collateral duties. You were an officer, and you worked in admin or you worked in personnel or somewhere. And I always liked to go down, asked to be assigned to maintenance because that's where the people were. That was the fun part of it. And I had a guy. I was in Okinawa. One of my collateral duties was officer in charge of the flight equipment. The flight equipment guys are the ones that take care of their survival vest and their helmet and the parachutes for the OV-10 guys. We didn't have them in helicopters, but I walked in there, and I had 3 guys in there. I had a sergeant, a corporal, and I think a lance corporal. Well, the corporal, his name was Mike Kenny, and he was like 19 or 20 years old and gray-headed. Had salt and pepper gray hair, just premature. But he was obviously the guy in charge, and the sergeant was fine with that because he was kind of a lazy so-and-so. And Corporal Kenny would take care of his pilots, the guys because you check in with them every time you went flying. You go in and get your flight equipment. And he got to the point where he would go down to the group supply, which was the next higher level. If he needed something, he'd go down there and basically steal it if he could.
Sergeant Bilko?
Well, no, he was more like Radar O'Reilly. That's who he reminded me of. Really, I mean, he acted like him and had the same kind of personality.
The second sense.
And I remember one time two OV-10s were flying a formation into Iwakuni, Japan. And one of them stuck his wing in the other one's propeller. They both went down, and they had to punch out. They had ejection seats. And so they're floating around in these little one-man life rafts all night, and a couple of Japanese fishermen picked them up the next day, and, they were okay. They weren't hurt. And it took them about 3 weeks to work their way back down to the squadron. And about a month after that, here comes this cardboard box in with all their equipment that they had salvaged, their survival radios, and this one guy couldn't get his survival radio to work. So when the box came in, I happened to be down there, and Corporal O'Reilly's in there, Mike Kenny, and this guy came in, and he was just raising hell with Corporal Kenny because the radio didn't work. You're in charge of this, and you're supposed to make them work. And typical Radar O'Reilly says, well, all right, sir, go ahead and turn it on for me. You didn't know how. Of course, it's at night, he can't see, but he didn't know the equipment well enough to
know how
to be able to turn it on. And he said it wouldn't work. Corporal Kenny hit the on switch, and you could adjust the squelch where you could tell it was working. So it was.
What did the guy do?
He just kind of tucked his tail between his legs and walked off. I mean, it wasn't that big a deal. But anyway, the rest of the story, about 3 weeks later, I came in there, and
the way the survival radios were, we were at the tail end of the supply chain on Okinawa because all the priority went to Vietnam. And so we didn't have enough radios for everybody. They had to turn them in every time you came back from a flight, whether it was helicopters or fixed wing. And so they only had like, I don't know, 6 or 8 of them for the whole squadron. And so I came in.
How many in the squadron?
Oh, geez, I forget. There must have been 35 or 40 pilots, OV-10s and Huey pilots.
Oh, wow.
There was a pretty good size. I came in, walked in the door about 2 weeks after this incident, and here's a whole bunch of survival radios, brand new in a box, all around the place. And Corporal Kenny and his sergeant, they're writing down serial numbers and everything. And I said, where do those things come from? I didn't think we could get them out of here. And he says, he looks at me with straight face and says, sir, you really don't want to know. And he was right. I did. When I found out later, about a month later, I found what he had done. He'd gone over to the Air Force at Kadena Air Base.
Yes.
And he stole the damn things from the Air Force, same kind of radio. But he was looking out for his pilots.
That's how they do
That's
it.
the kind of guy he was. When you mentioned
Supplies, yes, yeah.
That's the way he did it. But he took care of his people, and can't fault him for that.
No.
Guys I was in the Guard with were a phenomenal bunch. I mean, if I had to go to war, I'd want to go with the National Guard people because they were just high class. The whole bunch of them. Most of them were former commissioned. And we were all warrant officers.
Experience, they knew.
Yeah, they knew what they were doing. They had command. They had battlefield experience. I had utmost admiration for them. Great people, and still keep in touch with a bunch of them because most of us were local around here.
Do you go to any of the?
We haven't. Our unit hasn't had any. Reunions, so to speak. We got together within the first 4 or 5 years. We would go to different people's houses, and just with the National Guard, if you got a couple cases of beer, you got a party going. It's the way they were. But we went summer camp every year. Was I'd say most of the time I was in the Guard in Alabama, we were a medevac unit. And medevac units in the Guard, when other units go to Camp Shelby, for example, to go to summer camp, they would have a medevac contingent, and you actually did medevac. You wouldn't go to train. You'd go, maybe 1 or 2 helicopters and crews, and you'd stand by the base hospital over there, and then, people got hurt in training accidents. You'd take them either to Biloxi or to Pine Forest General Hospital, or they had a little clinic there on the base, depending on what they were doing. So we would, got nothing to do except sit around and read books and tell stories and drink beer at night. So it was. I thoroughly enjoyed the National Guard. It was a well-run organization. They had some of the finest people I've ever known.
Would you you'd recommend it to?
Oh, highly. As a helicopter pilot, particularly.
Yeah. I forgot to ask you one thing. Any thoughts or philosophy about young people joining or being part of how you feel about the military now?
I would highly recommend it. People say thank you for your service. Well, it was my pleasure, really. I mean, of course, I never actually went to war, but it's like any other job. You're going to have highs and lows, but particularly the last 2 years in the Marine Corps were kind of crappy, but but that's just the way the Marine Corps was organized. But the National Guard, I have nothing but good things to say about, particularly in Alabama. It's a well-run organization, I thought, and had good commanders. They took care of their own.
Good. Well, thank you so much, and thank you for your service.
My pleasure. It really was.